Well, Callie, we're now inside the, as I understand it, we're inside the Grandma Moses School.
We are inside the Grandma Moses Schoolhouse, and as you can see, we have this part of it set up as a school. The idea is that if you bring your children here, or if you bring adults here who like to have fun, you can sit down, you can actually sit in a real school desk. These desks aren't from the Grandma Moses Schoolhouse, but they're actually from a schoolhouse in Bennington, the one that's over across from Camelot Village. And you can practice your handwriting. As you said, handwriting is not taught in school today. So this is a historic exercise, if you will. We have some arithmetic books, some grammar books if you want to learn how children learn their ABCs and 1, 2, 3s back in the old days. And we also have some artifacts in the case that are related to going to school and what children would have done back 100, 150 years ago, and what Grandma Moses would have been doing as a child.
That's really interesting. I mean, the fact that this is where it happened, this is where she actually went to school. I mean, the schoolhouse has been moved, but this is her actual environment. When did Grandma Moses start painting? Isn't that the part of the story that
she started painting very, very late in her life? I think she was in her 70s when she started painting. She had been interested in art even as a child. She tells a story in her autobiography about how her father would occasionally bring home colored paper for the kids, and that was, the highlight of her day. And she enjoyed, making, paper dolls, coloring their faces with, berries or whatever she could get her hands on.
Right.
And but she was quite elderly when she started painting. She had been doing needlework, and found that as she was getting older, she had arthritis in her hand. She couldn't really hold the needle and handle it well enough to do this fine needlework, and so she took up a paintbrush and started painting. And her daughter told her that she was doing a really good job. She should actually try to exhibit these, and she did at one point exhibit them at the Washington County Fair. And she also exhibited some pickles and canned goods, and her pickles and canned goods won prizes. Her paintings did not get any notice at all, but luckily for her, she was later presenting them at the Women's Exchange in Hoosick Falls at the drugstore in town. I can't think of the name of it right now. And Otto Collier, an art dealer from New York City, happened to come up and happened to see these paintings and was absolutely enchanted with them and went to visit her and ended up buying everything that she had and continued this relationship with her, publicized her work, and is primarily responsible for making her the household name that she is today.
There is an exhibit here with many of, I don't know how many Grandma Moses original paintings, not
Yes.
the prints, but
we have her real paintings. We have the largest collection of her paintings, or the largest public collection of her paintings in the world, and they are on exhibit here in a permanent gallery. They're one of our most popular exhibits, and it's something that people come here to see. People come from Japan, they come from Europe, they come from all over the world to see our Grandma Moses collection. It's quite fabulous.
That's great. Well, let's go upstairs and look at some more art.
All right.
Art and artifacts. We're now in the Bennington Pottery Gallery. And Callie, if you can just kind of give us a quick summary. It looks like an awful lot of educational things.
It's a lot of pottery.
A lot of pottery. Thank you for saying that.
Bennington is very well known for its pottery production. In the late 1700s, the Norton family started manufacturing redware here in Bennington. They were using local clay. And then later in the 1800s, they started making this beautiful decorated stoneware. And they also designed and actually patented a way to make the glazed Rockingham ware that you see here, which has this brilliant flint enamel glaze with lots of colors and lots of different designs and relief. There were two potteries that operated here in the mid-1800s. One was the Norton pottery, the other was the United States pottery. And the U.S. pottery was founded by I'm blanking on his name now, Fenton, who was married to one of the Norton girls and worked in conjunction with the Norton pottery. And they actually started manufacturing Perrion as well, which is a kind of white ceramic that you see behind me here in these pictures. And it was the first time that anyone had manufactured Perrion pottery in the United States. And it was relatively successful.
Those are fascinating.
They're great, yes.
The dogs and
the poodles are wonderful.
Poodles, yeah,
yes.
Inlaid.
Yep. So they were also making decorative ware. So they made things like the poodles the little cow creamers, other little statuary, and it did relatively well. The United States Pottery ended up going out of business after, I think, 10, 15 years, so they weren't around for very long. But the Nortons continued to do business in town up until the late 1800s, early 1900s. And at that point, people weren't really using pottery as much. They had moved on to either glass canning jars or other methods of preserving food.
One of my more interesting pieces, I actually saw it up in the old cemetery, which is, what, 100 yards from here, but this is not only a cemetery gravestone, but it's also a work of art. What is the background of this? This is Jedediah Dewey.
This is the headstone for Reverend Jedediah Dewey, who was the very first pastor in Vermont and was pastor of the Old First Church in Bennington. And it was also one of the very early settlers and one of the founding fathers, I guess, of the Dewey clan, who are, of course, still around in Vermont. And this one is really, as a gravestone, it's got all of the fun stuff that they do in the 1700s. What's particularly fun about this is that it's actually signed, it says made by F.M., who was Frederick Manning, who was part of a family of gravestone makers I think they're originally from Massachusetts or Connecticut.
Just like an artist would sign a...
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Which is interesting because most gravestones are not signed because they're works of art, yes, but they're also practical things. And the point of a gravestone isn't to memorialize the artist, it's to memorialize the person.
Right.
So it's unusual to find one that's actually signed, which is part of what makes this one so neat. Another thing is that it actually has this Shakespeare quote, which is really unusual in gravestones from the 1700s. Shakespeare was not big in the United States in the late 1700s. But Jedediah Dewey was a very educated man, so it's not terribly surprising that this is what he chose as his epitaph. And it says, "Let's talk of graves and worms and epitaphs, make dust our paper, and with rainy eyes write sorrow in the bosom of the earth," which is from, one of the Henrys, I believe. So it is a very moving epitaph, and one that was obviously suited for a man of his education and his stature in the community.
If I remember a little of the history, Jedediah Dewey would have been Ethan Allen's minister. Mm-hmm. Ethan Allen's religion got a little...
it got a little shaky there.
Got a little shaky, and it was his son that built the Walloomsac Tavern, Elijah.
Yes, Elijah Dewey.
And I think his house is still in existence, Jedediah Dewey.
I believe it is, yes. I believe it's one of those houses up on Monument Avenue.
It's a fabulous piece of work.
Yes, it
a
is.
piece of art. That's absolutely... And I won't touch it.
Oh, thank you.
Well, Callie, we're now in the church gallery, as you call it, and we're looking at my favorite section of the church gallery, and that's all the artifacts, or a lot of the artifacts from the Catamount Tavern, which was the headquarters of the Green Mountain Boys. That's where John Stark at the Battle of Bennington had his headquarters and so on. And some of these are pretty intriguing.
There's a lot of great stuff here. We have a lot of pieces that are related to the Battle of Bennington and to the Catamount Tavern and to the Fay family that owned the tavern. So we have pieces that were owned by them, some books that were owned by Mary Fay, a teacup. We have a lot of glassware that was used in the tavern. The tavern, of course, was primarily a place of drinking and socializing, so glassware obviously very important. We also have here, this is one of my favorite things in our collection, this is Ethan Allen's drinking tab. And you can kind of see up here, it's a little bit hard to read, but at the very top is Ethan Allen. He's getting supper. And then there are some other names below him. And then there's what they were drinking. So there's one bottle of wine. There's another bottle of wine. There's half a bottle of toddy, which is a rum drink mixed together. It sounds a little bit disgusting the way they made it back in those times. And this is just a rough memorandum sheet that Stephen Fay would later have transferred to his actual ledger to keep track of his accounts. And we have the ledger in our collection too, but this is just one of his memo sheets that he kept so he could keep track of things.
And down there you have the council room.
Yep.
what do we call it, a stone above the fireplace?
This was the mantelpiece for the council room.
Mantelpiece,
You can
right.
kind of see the picture of it here. We have the andirons as well. The Catamount Tavern was where one of the Council of Safety met here before the Battle of Bennington, and during the Green Mountain Boys were involved in the Battle of Bennington in the Revolutionary War, but they started out as a group that was trying to defend Vermonters against New York State, because New Hampshire at the time had granted this money, or had granted land in Vermont to different people, and then the state of New York, or the colony, I should say, the colony of New York had granted that land to the same people. And the boundary was very ambiguous, the way the king had granted the land to the two colonies. And so people were going back and forth with the king, trying to get him to give them an answer, and he kept stalling. And so the Green Mountain Boys kind of took things into their own hands and went out and started attacking Yorkers who were trying to assert their own perfectly legitimate claims on land that the Vermonters had already settled. So the Catamount Tavern was the Ethan Allen's headquarters, and Ethan Allen was the head of the Green Mountain Boys.
Right.
And he owned the house across the street from the tavern, which is probably why they chose to meet here. And so it was very much a center of community life, as taverns were in the 1700s.
Of course, if I remember right, the catamount is part of the lynx or panther
It's a big
species.
cat. It's kind of like
it's
a
a big
giant
cat with a
cougar.
long tail.
Yes.
The other thing too, the University of Vermont is called the catamounts.
They are called the catamounts. It is a species that is, or was at one point, native to Vermont. Even in the 1700s, there weren't very many of them around, so it was big news when somebody went out and caught one. And they were also quite dangerous. They were killing a lot of the settlers' sheep, and which is why they were going out, and they were eventually hunted to extinction. Extinction in Vermont. They moved up to Canada and other more forested places. And at one point, a great big cat was killed and mounted on the signpost of the Catamount Tavern, which is actually what gave it its name. And this is during the conflict between the Vermonters and New York State. And the idea was that this cat was snarling defiance to the state of New York. And so it was facing toward New York State.
That's right. That the statue is snarling and it's facing west.
That is why. That is exactly why it's facing west, because it is defending Vermont against those evil Yorkers.
Well, let's see if there's anything else here, or you can comment. This is a wonderful room. I mean, this is it's got a lot of I'd say miscellaneous or different items.
A kind way to put this would be open storage. There's very minimal signage on most of these pieces, but it's a lot of stuff, and it kind of gives you an idea of the breadth of our collection and the depth of it too. Please don't touch anything. I know, it's so difficult. That's okay. This is the original building that was originally St. Francis de Sales Church. And you can kind of see the Gothic windows that we saw on the outside. And it's been part of the gallery here since the museum opened in 1928, as I said. And we have, early cooking implements, early sewing pieces, early musical instruments, early toys, a lot of portraits of people from Bennington and from the Bennington area. This is Isaac Titchener's bed frame. It's beautifully carved. He was, of course, a really important person and could afford a beautiful bed like this. This is not what most people were sleeping in.
He was a former governor.
He was. He was one of the early governors of Vermont. Lived right down the road.
Yeah, you mentioned before.
Yep. He's from nearby. And we also have things like Nirvana here. We saw the Lincoln sculpture outside. This is what she was originally supposed to look like. Without Lincoln, I think she looks a lot better. She's quite nice in marble stone.
Well, do you have a lot of other artifacts in the collection?
We do. We estimate that we have about 40,000 artifacts in our collection. We recently finished a comprehensive inventory of everything, and we're working right now to get our catalog online. We're working on updating our website, and we're going to get to the point where people can go to their computer in the comfort of their very own home, type in something like Isaac Titchener, and see everything that we have in our collection related to Isaac Titchener, and there's quite a bit. Or you could type in Moses Robinson, or Ethan Allen, or Clyde DuVernay Hunt, if you're interested in the Lincoln trilogy, and find lots of information and a lot of the really fascinating things that we have in our collection that, unfortunately, we just don't have room to display.
Do you have some examples of
Sure. This is our storage room. Welcome to storage. It's one of my favorite places here in the museum. This is where we keep everything that's not currently on display.
This is a wow.
Uh-huh.
This is a wow.
It is. We have an estimated 40,000 objects in our collection, and we've been working on a comprehensive inventory of everything over the past 10 years. So we've been going through all of those galleries that you saw, everything back here, room by room, shelf by shelf, case by case, looking at every single item in the collection and making sure that it is what it says it is, making sure that the records that we have match up to the objects that we have. It's been quite an undertaking.
What are some of these items?
Yeah, let's look at a couple interesting things. This is one of my favorite things right here. This is a paper mache elephant advertising Hamlin's Wizard Oil. Great for pain, it says. This came to us from the Vermont Country Store, which is over across from Camelot Village now. It's now a private house. And Hamlin's Wizard Oil was one of your patent medicine companies that was selling basically snake oil to people in the late 1800s. And at that time, this is before the Pure Food and Drug Act, so they can pretty much say that their stuff does whatever they want and has whatever they want to say is in it, whether really does or not. Most of your patent medicines at the time contain mostly alcohol, which is why they make you feel better. They don't really do you much good, but they make you feel better. Hamlin's Wizard Oil was fun because they would actually come into town with a 3-ring circus and do a whole little show to sell their medicines, and then they created these advertising figures as well, which they would leave with your local drugstores. And another fun thing that we have up above, I'm going to put on my fancy white gloves.
It looks familiar, but I
Mickey
don't
Mouse.
know what it is.
This is an Olympic torch. At the Olympic Games in Atlanta, of course, they brought the torch all around the country, and this one was used by Bob Madison, locally famous Benningtonian, recently passed away, and was one of the people who had the honor of carrying the torch through Bennington. And after he did that, he donated his torch to us.
Oh, so they gave each of the people the...
Yeah, each person who carries the torch has an option to buy it, and I believe his children actually bought the torch or gave him the money to purchase the torch that he carried. And then he gave it to us. So we have a real Olympic torch in the collection.
That's terrific.
Isn't it? And I put this back.
Now do you have...
And then let's go see some other things. We have 2 storage rooms because one is never enough. So here we are in Storage B. And we're going to look at some fun stuff. This is one of the newest acquisitions in our collection. This is a collection of glass plate negatives that was a partial donation by Tortoise Iselhart, who had worked with Bob Weicker, who worked with the Bennington Banner and collected photographs of Bennington for many, many years. And it's really exciting. It includes...
Is this from Images of the Past?
Yes, Tortoise Iselhart, yes.
Oh.
Yes, that's the one.
Well-known collection.
Very well-known collection. We are so excited to have it in the museum. We have a very large collection of historic photographs, including thousands of glass plate negatives, and now we have thousands more. These are really exciting because a lot of these were taken by Willis White, Madison Watson, Sipperley, and Calvin Dart, who were some of the most prominent professional photographers in Bennington in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So there's an example of one here, so you can kind of see what they look like. This has a little paper sticker on it, which isn't really supposed to be there. The thing about glass plate negatives is that in this form, they don't really do an awful lot, so you can't display them, you can't really see them, we can't make them accessible to the public. So one of the things that we're working on is trying to get an intern who can help me out to scan them and catalog them. So once they're cataloged, you'll be able to search and look for a picture of the Bennington Battle Monument, the Catamount Tavern, the Old First Church, or wherever your house is in town. And we just might be able to find it. There are a lot of really exciting images in here, so we're really excited to have this collection.
I think if I remember right, the pictures of the Catamount Tavern, which burnt down in the 1870s, one of those pictures you see frequently was taken by, you mentioned him, White. or
It was taken by not Madison Watson. I think it was taken by Calvin Dart.
Calvin Dart? Yeah, it was a very common picture with a couple of people. In
Yeah,
the
there are
front.
only 3 or 4 pictures of the Catamount
that's
Tavern that
real-
are around,
real
and
good news.
that's one of them. Yeah, it's very exciting. Other things that we have back here. One of the first globes ever made in the United States of America. James Wilson, who was from Bradford, Vermont, was very disappointed with the quality of the globes that were available. He wanted a globe for his local school, and they were very expensive to import them from Europe. So he set out, he was a farmer, and he learned engraving, he learned geography, he bought himself a set of Encyclopedia Britannicas, and learned how to make globes.
Did all that just to
Really, it's
just
an
to make a
incredible,
globe.
yeah, it's a pretty incredible story. And he started making these commercially. They actually come in pairs. There's a terrestrial globe and a celestial globe. This is an early example of one of the terrestrial ones. So it's interesting because you can kind of see, North America here. I'm going to turn it a little bit for you. And then you see like Australia, as much as they know about it. And some of this area is still not very well explored. So he's making some guesses based on the knowledge that he has at the time. But yes, one of the very first globes made in the United States, right here in the Bennington Museum.
That's fascinating.
It is.
What's this? Just to divert a little, what is this?
This is an early footstool. Again, these also came in pairs. It's from the early 1700s. I think that was made by, I want to say Mary Fay Robinson.
A well-known Bennington.
Well-known Benningtonian from the late 1700s, early 1800s. And this is one of my favorite artifacts in the museum. This is a coat. And remember when we were looking at the Bennington Battle mural down in the military gallery?
Right.
I told you that they were using the best resources they had at the time to make the judgments as to how to portray people in that mural. This is a coat that supposedly came from a British redcoat, was captured at the Battle of Bennington. And when the museum acquired it in the early 1900s, around 1930, I believe, they realized at the time, after doing a little research, that it didn't date to the Revolutionary War period. The style was a little bit different. So they figured that it was from the War of 1812 and had been captured either at the Battle of Plattsburgh or one of the other battles around here during the War of 1812. And then I was doing an exhibit on the War of 1812 a couple years ago, and I did some more research on this. And it's relatively easy to do research these days because of the internet, and there's a lot of interest in various British redcoats, different regiments, and you can go through and see what different regiments were wearing. The patterns on this jacket are not what any of the British regiments were wearing during the War of 1812. But here's where it gets interesting. The Vermonters and really the militia units throughout the United States didn't necessarily have a set uniform. They would wear whatever their commander decided was an appropriate uniform. And the cavalry units in particular were quite fond of wearing red coats. So what this is, more than likely, is there was a cavalry unit in Bennington commanded by Benjamin Fassett in the early 1800s, and this is probably from that cavalry unit. So it's actually a Vermont militia redcoat, not a British redcoat, which is fascinating because you don't really get a lot of these. And we have 2 of them in the collection. And the fact that 2 of them were found in Bennington also kind of helps to support the fact that this was a Bennington regiment, and after they were no longer being worn, they were put away in an attic. And when they were found years later here in Bennington, someone assumed, well, of course, it's a redcoat. It's a British redcoat from the Battle of Bennington. Why would it not be? So I just think it's a really interesting story of a mistaken identity.
No, that's great.
There's a lot of research that goes into everything here.
That takes a lot of research.
We make assumptions sometimes, and sometimes our assumptions turn out to be false.
Sometimes a lot of times they turn out to be right.
There are, yes.
Well, Callie, thank you very much for showing us the museum, for explaining all these artifacts. It's been terrific. I can't say enough about the Bennington Museum. Please come down and visit the museum. It's open, well, they have a website, and you can go and find out the directions and everything else. It is a wonderful museum, especially for a town the size of Bennington. It's absolutely fabulous. And I didn't mention it before, but they also have a research library here. Tyler Resch is a librarian if you're into genealogy and everything else. It's really worth a day's visit here. So again, thank you very much,
You're
Callie,
very welcome.
and we will see you next time.